Looking to break into or advance your career in cybercrime and cybersecurity? Push your career forward with a master's degree in cybercrime and digital investigation from Michigan State University. Experience a nationally ranked program taught by world-renowned researchers and practitioners that can help you play a role in combating cybercrime and advancing justice for victims. Designed to be completed in as little as 2 years and in a flexible online format that can work around your schedule. Visit cj.msu.edu to learn more.
Welcome, everybody, to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. My name is Tom Holt. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State University, and I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training. And I'm here with one of my wonderful co-hosts. Taylor, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Fisher. I'm an assistant professor here at Michigan State, and I'm an associate with the Cyber Center.
And we have two wonderful guests with us today from the UK, here to talk about some research they've been doing over the last few years in cybercrime. We have with us Professor Julia Davidson, who's the director of the Child Online Harms Policy Think Tank and the Institute for Connected Communities, as well as Dr. Ruby Farr, who's an associate director of the Child Online Harms Policy Think Tank and a senior research fellow at the Institute for Connected Communities at the University of East London. Thank you both for joining us.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for the invitation. It's really great to be here chatting with you today about all things cybercrime.
So tell us how you got interested in studying cybercrime.
I'm happy to start, Ruby, if you want to kick in afterwards. So perhaps I could tell you about some of the context of some of the exciting work we've been conducting in this area over the last few years, Tom. So I've been working in the child safeguarding, online safeguarding area for many, many years. In fact, long before it became an issue online. And I'd say over the last 20 years, our focus has really moved to online offending and victimization. And then we've been acting at the Institute, we've been acting as advisors to the Europol Cybercrime Centre, that's EC3, which is based in The Hague. And probably about 5 years ago, we were on an advisory board with them. And they said to us, so what they would do through this advisory board is to bring current policing issues to us, that they were trying to solve, and they really wanted some research. So they said, one issue that's really of concern to us is the increasing number of young people who are coming through the criminal justice system who are perpetrating some really serious acts. And, we're very concerned about those young people because the EC3 remit is around prevention and protection and intervention with young people. And they said, we don't know what's prompting them to do that. So could you conduct some research for us to explore kind of motivations, modus operandi, so we can develop some prevention programs, awareness raising programs, and work with these young people directly. So we said, yeah, sure. So we found a small amount of money at the time. I was working with a professor called Mary Aiken, and we found a small pot of money to do some qualitative work. And then we started to work with stakeholders and young people to explore their motivations and just look at what the drivers were that were bringing them into cybercrime with a view to thinking about prevention. And then after we'd done that small piece of work, we noticed that the European Commission had put out a big call for a grant that looked at youth cybercrime much more directly. So a lot more funding was involved in this particular grant. And we bid for it through with partners in 13 European countries. It was led by an agency called Trilateral, who do a lot of cybercrime research. And we were lucky enough to get that funding. And so we had about €1 million from the European Commission to conduct a big study that explored the kind of human and technical drivers of cybercrime amongst young people. So that study involved a very rich data set. The book that we've just published is based on that data set. So involved a series of interviews with stakeholders who've been working with young people who've become involved in a whole range of cybercrime. So not just kind of financial cybercrime, but across the board. We looked at sexual offending as well, sexual cybercrimes. We looked at online hate as well, racism. So a whole range of online harms as well that perhaps we haven't thought of being cybercrime in the past. We conducted a really big survey of young people, 8,000 young people in 8 European countries participated in that survey. And what we tried to do was to look at their experience, pathways into their experience of perpetrating, but also to look at some associations with risk behaviours as well, behaviours that you could call risky online. So that's the basis of the work. And we're actually still doing some analysis from that data set. And Ruby is doing some work now on gender and cybercrime as a follow-up. So it's been quite a journey, but we feel as if we've learned a huge amount from those young people that participated in the work.
So give us some top-line findings.
Ruby, do you want to kick in now for a bit?
Yeah, I think it's so we did three different kind of data collections that are all included in this book. And the first of those was a large scale study looking at interviews with youth cybercrime experts from 16 countries worldwide. So this was mainly European countries, but we did include experts from Canada and the United States as well. And we used those interviews, and there's so many interesting things that came out of those, and I'll speak a little bit about that. But we used those to help us to build the survey that Professor Davidson's just talked about. And it really is a huge survey. So we're going to probably be looking at different types of analysis within that survey data set for years, I would imagine, aren't we, Julia? Because there's so much in there. And then finally, we interviewed convicted cyber criminals, which was the final bit of data that we collected. And there's lots of interesting things that's come out of all three of those, and then bringing them together that's come out of thinking about all of those findings together as well. I think one of the big things that was really quite shocking was that just under 50% of the young people that took part in our survey, so 8,000 young people across 8 countries, had engaged in cybercrime, and that is a huge amount. We weren't expecting the percentage to be as high as it was, and they're not necessarily serious cybercrime. A lot of that is low level digital piracy and things. But it is still, it really shows the level of young people that do engage in risky and harmful and illegal activities online. But another interesting thing that we talk about in the book is really the synergies between what the experts told us and what the convicted cyber criminals told us. And again, that's not something that I personally expected them to be talking, thinking in the same ways, if you like. So the experts that we interviewed were a range, including law enforcement, academics, frontline professionals, government representatives. So a good range of experts who took part. But they really talked about the need to better protect young people from being drawn into committing illegal activities online. And they really recognized that young people, and actually adults, I don't think, really know what is legal and what is illegal online, or what is risky online, or what is harmful online. And that's obviously an issue. So, young people might share an indecent image or hack a friend, and they don't really know that is actually, that's a crime. So that came out quite strongly, and the need for better off-ramps, more opportunities to hone skills for people who do have a fascination and a curiosity with tech, who have a technical aptitude and are naturally very good at coding and things, allowing them more opportunities for education. That came out very clearly as well. And that's something that came out of the interviews with convicted cybercriminals as well, that frustration and looking for ways to test their skills and learn more kind of led them down illegal routes and making networks with perhaps deviant networks online. So there was lots of similarities across those two interviews that really highlighted why so many young people, I guess, are drawn into behaving in not so good ways online. In terms of the survey, Julia's probably better, will be able to talk about this a bit more. But another thing that we found that was really interesting is the level of females that are engaging in online crime, because actually it's a massively male-dominated field, isn't it, cybercrime? When you think about cybercrime, you tend to think about young boys and not young girls. And there's lots of different reasons for that. But we were interested to see that some categories of cybercrime are perpetrated by girls, perhaps to the same level as they are by boys. So that was quite an interesting takeaway as well.
So before we get too far down this path of your, research experience, I wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about the importance of qualitative work. Both of you guys mentioned that at the beginning of the project, qualitative was really important. And I think that's something that we don't really get to talk about a lot. So could you guys speak to the importance of kind of starting this kind of project with those qualitative interviews and really hearing it from their, words directly?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a big fan, I think, of using qualitative work in this kind of work. And the qualitative work was really essential. So we used it at the beginning of the project through the stakeholder interviews to really frame our thinking around the development of the survey. And we also used a lot of qualitative work up front in terms of the cognitive testing of the survey. So we did a lot of qualitative work with a 3-stage approach with young people, just to make sure that the survey was it was valid, it was reliable, that the language was clearly understood and relevant by young people. So we used qualitative work extensively at the beginning and at the end. And I always say we do a lot of survey research, we have in the past, but I always say that the survey findings really highlight the kind of trends and patterns, but then it doesn't often provide the answers. So, it often raises more answers than you have, or questions than you have answers for. And the qualitative work really sheds light on those findings. So I think for me, although we only conducted a few offender interviews, a few interviews with convicted offenders, the depth and the detail from those interviews really shed so much light on some of the survey findings that were puzzling for us. And I think those interviews really highlighted the pathways as well, and young people's kind of life experience through the process. We were very interested in, well, where did this start for you? Where did your journey into cybercrime start? Because people don't start with the intention of becoming cyber offenders. They're somehow drawn into that. And what we were interested in those interviews, and Ruby can speak more to this because she conducted them, but what we were interested in those interviews was, what were the triggers? How were you drawn in? So a lot of the offenders were really developing an incredible interest in IT from a very young age, from the age of 5, some of them. And they got drawn in through various pathways, sometimes through interacting with networks on gaming platforms, that they were drawn in, and there were gatekeepers who led them through to cybercrime behaviour. So I think without that qualitative work, although the survey findings are amazing and we keep digging into the data, as Ruby said, that really without the qualitative findings, you'd be lacking that kind of detail and depth.
So tell us a little bit about the takeaways from the law enforcement side. I'm curious because we've talked a little bit about the juvenile component of this, but what did professionals have to say about the issue of cybercrime?
There's a really good infographic for anyone that wants to have a look at it, which is a summary of the expert interviews, and it takes you through from pathways in to pathways out of cybercrime, which is, I think, chapter 3 of our book. But they talked a lot about the need for education and awareness raising, and suggested a toolbox of interventions where young people are better safeguarded and have better avenues for testing and using their skills as well. I think from a law enforcement perspective, they did talk about the motivations for cybercrime in cases that they'd seen being largely financially motivated, but also the thrill and the curiosity and the reputation, especially for hackers, that might drive some young people in their experience to have committed certain types of cybercrime. But we haven't run an analysis specifically on the law enforcement participants who took part, only on all of the stakeholders together. And that would be probably quite an interesting thing to look at, actually, Tom.
Just to add to that, I would say that there's been, since we completed the research, we've been very proactive in trying to work with law enforcement stakeholders and other criminal justice stakeholders as well, in disseminating the findings, but in also thinking with them about the implications for their practice. And we've been working extensively with the National Crime Agency in the UK, who run the Cyber Threats Programme, which is a program, an intervention program for young people who've committed cybercrime. And they've used the findings to inform the development of that educational awareness program, the intervention program, and they've also built the findings into their strategy. So I think for us, it's very interesting to do the research as criminologists. We're interested in the findings and the implications in the context of criminological work. But I think it's really important for us as academics to be proactive in terms of the way we work with stakeholders and to try and help them to make the connections about how those findings can be used in practice. Because I think sometimes it's not always obvious. And obviously we need to work with them to better understand the areas of practice that need our help. So I think what's so nice about this piece of work is that it was an area of concern that was really originally highlighted by our stakeholder partners, and one that we followed through to develop the work. So it's a very practice-informed piece of work.
As you guys have been working through these interviews and these surveys and gaining all this information, you mentioned that it informed certain educational programs or certain interventions. And so I was wondering if you could speak to what are some of those interventions that you've found to be most impactful, or that you've really focused in on that can help kind of disrupt these patterns that you found?
I think it's a very good question, and I would say to you, impact is absolutely key in terms of all of the research that we conduct. It's sometimes very difficult to evidence, however. So, and what's frustrating sometimes as academics is you don't always have control over how that impact plays out and how it lands in practice. But, and I do wonder if it's rather early days for this project as well in terms of longer term impact. I hope there will be longer term impact, and we do try to track it, but it's really quite difficult. I think the best we can do really is to work proactively with those stakeholder groups, to share the findings with them, and in a very collaborative way to think about perhaps how the findings might shape their strategy, their practice in future. So, for example, one of the offshoots of this work is that, as Ruby said, we've just started to analyse the findings around gender, and I think the survey is fairly unique in that we have a kind of 50-50 gender split. So, we've got a large number of female respondents, and we're starting to analyse patterns of cybercrime amongst the female portion of the sample. We can have a look at that. But we've been working very closely with HMPPS, which is the Probation and Prison Service here in the UK, and they were big supporters of our original CC driver research grant, helping us to gain access to UK prisons, which was not an easy thing, I have to say. It took us a year to gain access through ethics, but they were big supporters of the work, and they are very interested in the gender aspect. And so we're now working on developing a study with them that looks specifically at the experience of female cyber offenders, convicted cyber offenders, so we have a better understanding of their motivations, of their pathways, just to make sure that some of the provision, criminal justice provision, is geared towards their needs and not just geared towards the needs of male offenders. So I think the best we can do is really continue to work with stakeholders, and Ruby's just been training Violence Reduction Network, which is a network across the UK that's funded by the Home Office, and we've been sharing all of our findings and insights with them as well to help inform their practice. So I think that's all we can do, and then to try and monitor impact as best we can.
And just to add in on that, actually, the HMPPS cyber threat team, who we worked with very closely to be able to gain access and conduct these interviews. One of the key findings that came out of the interviews was actually how to stop reoffending post-release. So, and that was a really important aspect of it, because actually they were very worried, the participants, about not being able to access tech post-release in a world where we all depend on technology. You need your smartphone to pay for parking, to bank, to book an appointment at the GPs. So we all rely on our phones all the time. And part of their release is that they can't access technology and they can't have a smartphone. And also, gaining employment and being able to pay bills without skills that aren't related to technology. So these were big findings from the interviews that, of course, were fed back to HMPPS, who we worked closely with. And I know that they have used those findings in their work, but I'm not exactly sure how. It's a shame we haven't got them here to explain that, but I do know that the findings have been incorporated to HMPPS in some ways.
So you've mentioned education and youth. To what extent, because it seems very important, but at least in the U.S. there's various educational programs that are implemented inconsistently in middle schools, high schools, even elementary education. Can you talk a little bit about how or to what extent either stakeholders or in your own work you think there's value in bringing in educational institutions to the process of cybercrime prevention or education, given if they don't know they're committing an offense, education as to what is cybercrime is kind of the first step in getting them to understand?
I'm happy to go first on that one, Tom. I think this is really important, and what we've been advocating through our work is a kind of whole society approach to addressing this issue that really includes children and young people as well. And I think through that whole society approach, we're very keen to include multi-stakeholder groups. And that would include educators, for example, parents, criminal justice as well, health practitioners. So in our sample of experts, we had a psychiatrist who'd been working with young people who'd been committing some fairly serious cybercrime. So I think it's really important to make sure that we have that multi-stakeholder approach. And in terms of the education piece, you're absolutely right. And in the UK as well, we have some really good kind of safety awareness, internet safety awareness programs that have been running for a long time, and they're good at what they do. But I think what's missing sometimes from that education is perhaps an understanding amongst educators about the kind of offences that young people are perpetrating, and also a lack of awareness around legal behaviour online as well. So, when behaviour, as Ruby was saying before, when behaviour crosses from being legal to illegal. And I always think in the UK, we are actually teaching primary school children, so that's children who are 8, 9 and 10, to code. It's not too far away from hacking, is it? So you've got those basic kind of coding skills. So really, we need to be educating children, I think, from a very young age, not only about safety, but about responsible use of the internet, about legal use as well. Very sad to see that in our sample, we had approximately in the survey, 1 in 8 young people who'd been money laundering. So, young people don't fall into money laundering on their own. They must have been groomed into that, presumably through criminal networks. So I think you're absolutely right. The education piece is so crucial.
So I imagine this was not part of the study given the timing, but how do you see AI impacting the overall issue of youth cybercrime?
I think we've already started to see some ways in which AI is starting to impact existing cybercrimes amongst young people, but also perhaps new ones as well. We, as part of the Child Online Harms Policy think tank, we've just run a roundtable event recently, actually, which was all about the potential harms of AI and the risks of AI, specifically for children and young people. And there's a lot of concern at the moment about the rise in use of chatbots and harmful conversations with chatbots that might encourage self-harm or harming others. And I think that's something that maybe we might see more of. But also, I think we all know AI-generated child sexual abuse material is also on the rise. That's, probably not, we don't know if that's perpetrated by young people or not, but that's an issue that we are seeing that's on the rise. But also amongst school-age children is deep fakes that are being circulated within schools, and what the ramifications are of that and what the responses are. And I know from an event that I was at yesterday with lots of teachers there, it's very confusing to know how to deal with that without victim blaming and, what the conversations you are and what the response is within schools to this huge rise in deep fakes being circulated. So I think we've got a lot of issues on the horizon with the use of AI. And of course, there's lots of really good benefits of AI. But also, as with anything else, there's also lots of risks as well. And it's very difficult for us, isn't it, as academics, but also for law enforcement and policy and legislation to keep up with technology. And AI is another aspect of this, and trying to keep up with the harms that are coming out of it for children and young people. It's a difficult task, and I think we're gonna see that in the next few years.
Yeah, I certainly think that AI is going to open up a lot of doors in terms of pathways, right? It's going to provide opportunities to young kids that maybe don't have the skill sets to be quite the hacker yet, but at least understand the programming and can follow up. So of everything we've talked about today, I think we've had a really widespread conversation about these different stakeholders and these different individuals that are involved with understanding and ultimately responding to juvenile cybercrime. So I wondered if you could distill everything we've talked about, all of your research, down to one key takeaway for our listeners. What do you think that's one thing that they need to remember from this talk?
Thanks, Taylor. I think that's a very interesting question. And somebody asked me that in an earlier interview today. I think it's very difficult because it's such a broad area. But I would say that for me, it's about, I guess, the reality of this situation. So if I reflect on the survey, for example, then I would say the vast majority, although the findings look, I think, concerning at first view, you've got 50% of young people perpetrating cybercrime to all intents and purposes, or around 50%. But I would say the vast majority of young people who were perpetrating cybercrime were perpetrating kind of fairly low level. So, we had very few young people who were really perpetrating the serious types of cybercrime that we're talking about. So hacking, indecent image sharing, other kind of sexual type offences. So that isn't to minimise the impact of that at all, but just to say I think we need to be realistic about the situation and acknowledge that the vast majority of young people are not perpetrating serious cyber crimes. And I think for me to be optimistic as well, if I think about some of the other research we've done, then that's more around victimisation, then we have to respect children and young people's agency in this space as well. They're often fully aware of a lot of the risks that are associated with with their behaviour online. So I think it's about giving children and young people credit in this space as well, and trying to be positive around some of the benefits. Just to add on just to end on a more positive note.
Ruby, do you have any thoughts as well?
Yeah, I think, based on some of the conversations that I had at this Violence Reduction Summit yesterday, I think something, and from our book, something that we as a society need to think about is actually safeguarding and empowering children and young people to be safe online as well as offline. We do so much to protect young people in our communities, and I think we need to think about doing that more in online spaces. And we know that teenage years are years of kind of rule breaking and risk taking and maybe pushing boundaries. We all know that probably from being teenagers ourselves. And I think cyberspace offers young people the ability to do that anonymously and often without really thinking about there being any repercussions. And that's quite natural, that kind of curiosity and that rule breaking. But as Julia said, it's easy to fall into low level, and then the escalation of that is something that came out of our interviews with convicted cyber criminals, that you escalate from very low level, slightly risky behaviours to quite serious cybercrime. So I think we need to just think about how to educate young people to be safe in those spaces, and also think about safety by design approaches in platforms as well, to help towards that.
Well, this was an excellent conversation. It was great to hear a little bit more about your work. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. We've enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to having you with us the next time we cross the firewall. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is crossing the firewall.